the 7 levels of UFC fighters. Today we are breaking down the absolute hierarchy of mixed martial arts, ranking fighters not just by their popularity, but by their pure, unadulterated skill, their technical mastery, their fight IQ, and their official achievements. We are going from the absolute bottom of the barrel to the undisputed apex of the sport. We will climb the ranks level by level, but let me warn you right now, the fighters waiting for you at level 7 are the most ruthless, terrifying, and dominant forces to ever step inside the octagon. Let's begin. Level 1. The absolute zeros. This is the bottom of the food chain. Level 1 consists of individuals who frankly had no business stepping into the premier mixed martial arts organization in the world. CM Punk. The ultimate experiment gone wrong. Phil Brooks was a professional wrestling superstar who transitioned to MMA with absolutely zero foundational background in striking or grappling. In his debut against Mickey Gall, he was taken down in seconds, exhibiting absolutely zero sprawl or defensive wrestling awareness before being effortlessly submitted. In his second fight against Mike Jackson, he showcased sluggish footwork, punches that looked like they were thrown underwater, and a complete lack of cardiovascular conditioning. He proved that heart and millions of dollars in training camps cannot buy a lifetime of martial arts experience. James Toney, an absolute legend inside the boxing ring, but a level 1 novice inside the octagon. James Toney entered the UFC at 42 years old to prove that boxing was superior to MMA. He was matched up against Randy Couture. The fight lasted exactly 3 minutes and 19 seconds. Toney displayed the fatal flaw of the single-discipline striker. He had zero takedown defense. The moment Couture shot for a low single leg, Toney collapsed to the mat. He had absolutely no idea how to operate off his back, no understanding of guard retention, and was easily choked out, cementing the fact that without grappling, you are nothing in MMA. Mike Jackson, a photographer and MMA journalist who somehow found himself fighting on the biggest stage in the world. Jackson's skill level was so remarkably low that UFC President Dana White publicly stated he never wanted to see him in the octagon again after his fight with CM Punk. Jackson possessed an incredibly rigid stance, practically no head movement, and a fundamental misunderstanding of octagon control. When he later fought Pete Rodriguez, he was brutally knocked out in the first round, showcasing that against even low-tier UFC athletes, an amateur skill set will get you severely hurt. Level 2. The human punching bags. Level 2 fighters are the ultimate journeymen. They are tough enough to survive in the UFC, but they lack the elite technique, fight IQ, or dynamic athleticism to ever become true contenders. They block punches with their faces and rely on grit rather than skill. Artem Lobov, famously dubbed the GOAT, purely as an internet meme, Artem Lobov is the quintessential level 2 fighter. With a negative win-loss ratio, Lobov survived in the UFC due to his iron chin and his relationship with Conor McGregor. Physically disadvantaged by incredibly short arms, Lobov's striking lacked any nuance. He relied entirely on lunging hooks with his hands down, absorbing tremendous amounts of damage to land a single shot. He had virtually zero defensive footwork and a highly vulnerable submission defense. Chris Moutinho secured his spot in UFC infamy by stepping in on short notice to fight Sean O'Malley. What he displayed was a masterclass in heart, but a complete zero in defensive technique. Moutinho absorbed a record-shattering 230 significant head strikes in a single fight. He possessed a fundamental inability to move his head off the center line, simply marching straight forward like a zombie into elite sniper fire. His offensive output was entirely negated by his lack of feints, setups, and defensive responsibility. Sam Alvey. Once a decent middleweight, Alvey's skill set rapidly decayed into one of the most frustrating styles in UFC history. He holds the unfortunate record for tying the longest winless streak in UFC history. His strategy was entirely one-dimensional. Back up directly against the cage fence, smile at his opponent, and wait to throw a counter left hook. He demonstrated zero offensive wrestling, zero ability to cut off the cage, and a completely stagnant fight IQ that allowed opponents to easily outpoint him for 15 minutes straight. Level 3. The one-dimensional specialists. Ben Askren, a two-time NCAA Division I national champion and an Olympian. Askren's wrestling was so suffocating that he remained undefeated for a decade outside the UFC. However, his striking was quite literally amateur level. He possessed no jab, terrible defensive posture, and visibly turned his head away from punches. This massive hole in his game culminated in the fastest knockout in UFC history, a 5-second flying knee from Jorge Masvidal, who correctly predicted Askren would mindlessly dive for a takedown without any striking setup. Demian Maia. Arguably the greatest Brazilian jiu-jitsu practitioner to ever grace the octagon. Maia's grappling was a thing of beauty. If he got your back, the fight was over. However, his level 3 status comes from his severe lack of high-level striking and explosive wrestling. Against elite anti-grapplers like Tyron Woodley or Kamaru Usman, Maia went winless on dozens of takedown attempts. Because he had no dangerous striking to make his opponents respect his hands, they simply defended the shot, leaving Maia completely stranded and ineffective on his feet. Ryan Hall, the Wizard, is an incredibly decorated BJJ black belt famous for his 50-50 guard and relentless Imanari rolls. Hall won fights by literally somersaulting across the octagon to dive on leg locks. However, his entire style was a gimmick based on the threat of the submission. When he fought Ilia Topuria, Topuria refused to engage in the grappling. Forced to rely on his incredibly awkward, non-traditional kickboxing, Hall was easily backed up, continuously fell to the ground to avoid strikes, and was ultimately knocked out cold, exposing the fragility of a purely submission-reliant style. Level 4. The Elite Gatekeepers. Michael Chandler. Chandler has all the physical tools of a Level 7 fighter. He possesses explosive, terrifying one-punch knockout power and elite NCAA Division I wrestling. Donald Cowboy Cerrone. For years, Cowboy held the record for the most wins and most finishes in UFC history. He was a devastating Muay Thai striker with a lethal triangle choke off his back. However, Cowboy was plagued by two glaring weaknesses: a severe vulnerability to body strikes and a tendency to mentally fold under the high-pressure lights of championship fights. Dustin Poirier, the Diamond, has one of the best boxing skill sets in the history of the lightweight division. His shifting combinations, counterhooks, and immense durability make him a nightmare on the feet. He won the interim title and knocked out Conor McGregor twice. However, Poirier's kryptonite keeps him from the highest levels: elite chain wrestling. In all of his undisputed title shots, Poirier's defensive wrestling and susceptibility to backtakes were his ultimate undoing. Level 5. The Flawed Champions. Charles Oliveira, Du Bronx, holds the absolute record for the most finishes and most submissions in UFC history. His offensive Muay Thai is lethal, and his offensive BJJ is unmatched. However, Oliveira's defensive striking is a massive liability. He relies on a high Muay Thai guard with very little head movement, resulting in him getting knocked down in the first round of almost all his title fights. Sean Strickland, a former middleweight champion who utilizes a highly unique modern style. Strickland fights out of a modified Philly shell, heavily utilizing an elite piston-like jab and incredible distance management. Tyron Woodley. During his prime, the Chosen One was a terrifying welterweight champion. He possessed a nuclear right hand and 90% takedown defense backed by Division I wrestling. But Woodley had a psychological and tactical flaw. He constantly backed himself flat against the cage fence. Level 6. The Generational Dominators. Kamaru Usman. The Nigerian Nightmare went on a historic 15-fight win streak in the UFC, defending his welterweight title 5 times. Usman started as a pure wrestler, but evolved into a lethal striker under Trevor Whitman. He possessed the best jab in MMA, terrifying straight punch knockout power, and for the vast majority of his career, an unbelievable 100% takedown defense. Alexander Volkanovski. The Great ruled the featherweight division with ironclad dominance. Volkanovski is the ultimate strategic fighter. Standing at only 5 feet 6 inches, he consistently outstruck taller opponents using masterful feints, stance switching, and perfect distance management. Demetrius Johnson. Mighty Mouse is technical perfection personified. He holds the all-time UFC record for the most consecutive title defenses at 11. Johnson was a true mixed martial artist, transitioning seamlessly between lightning-fast kickboxing, elite wrestling, and slick submissions. Level 7. The absolute apex. Jon Jones. Bones is the youngest champion in UFC history and the undisputed GOAT of mixed martial arts. Statistically, he has never been beaten by an opponent. Standing 6 feet 4 inches with a freakish 84-inch reach, Jones uses the octagon like a grandmaster playing chess. He fundamentally changed MMA striking by introducing devastating oblique kicks to destroy his opponent's knees, paired with brutal spinning elbows. But what makes Jones terrifying is his wrestling. He has out-wrestled Olympic-level grapplers and outstruck world-class kickboxers. Georges St-Pierre, GSP, is the gold standard for what a perfect mixed martial artist should be. A 2-division champion, he dominated the deepest division in the UFC for a decade, avenging his only 2 losses in brutal, decisive fashion. Despite having a karate background, GSP developed the greatest reactive double-leg takedown the sport has ever seen. He timed his shots flawlessly underneath his opponent's punches, utilizing a punishing jab to set up his entries. Once on the ground, his top control was an inescapable, suffocating blanket. He fought multiple generations of killers and made them all look completely helpless. Khabib Nurmagomedov, the Eagle, is the most dominant, unstoppable force to ever step into a cage. He retired with a flawless professional record, and more terrifyingly, he left the sport without ever bleeding, without ever being knocked down, and only ever officially losing 2 rounds in his entire career. A combat sambo master, Khabib utilized his patented Dagestani handcuff, wrapping up his opponent's legs and trapping their wrists against the cage. Once he took you down, it was an inevitability. He physically broke his opponents, draining their life force with relentless ground and pound while actively talking to them and demanding they give up. He faced the absolute greatest strikers in the lightweight division, Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje, and submitted every single one of them. He is the ultimate unbreakable apex of mixed martial arts.